Okay, good morning all. Welcome to what's going to be quite a busy half hour. Obviously the BBA services, a very brief overview. The agreement process itself, because I'm sure you're all familiar with agreement certificates, but what lies behind those is perhaps more of a closed book. Then going to look at the key guidance and standards in this topic of discussion today, moisture and airtightness. And then a very few words on Brexit. Apart from agreement certificates, we do have a test services division, as it were. And it's not just servicing agreement certification, it does testing for all sorts of customers who have got nothing to do with agreement certification, in particular innovative products. We have a audit and inspection division as well. Again, they do a lot of independent work, not just supporting agreement certification. And they fall into sort of two halves, the construction process inspections and the factory and management systems inspections. To support those services, we've got a very strong suite of UCAS accreditation. We seem to have UCAS auditors in all the time, checking one thing or another. And that is helpful for us. It makes sure we are on our toes, as it were. And they bring in technical experts when they need to. Obviously the BBA covers a very wide range of product types and applications. A more recent venture is like a sister company called Consultancy, Investigation and Training. Now this was set up quite separate from the BBA, but it comes under a BBA holding company. And this is providing services to local authorities, housing associations in particular, who sometimes struggle with the technical side of issues associated with energy retrofits. It seems quite common that these bodies have sort of lost a lot of technical expertise, and they're very stretched, the ones that remain. So that is a separate venture. It's quite independent of the BBA agreement process. But they're based in Cardiff, and they do consultancy and training as requested. So the agreement certificate itself, what is it? Obviously it's a badge and it's recognisable, but it seems that often the certificate itself is not read or understood often, unless there's a problem or a complaint or a failure. So we'll look behind that in the coming half hour. In my opinion, this is an independent opinion of fitness for purpose, and the criteria that we adopt is the building regulations guidance, which is not mandatory, but it is there, and it covers common building situations and the like. One thing to stress though is an agreement certificate is for two things. It's for a product, which may or may not be the whole product range a customer has. It's for a specific product, and it's for a specific use. So although it's easy to say I've ticked the box, I've got the agreement, it doesn't necessarily mean that every product in that product range and every use that that product might be used for is necessarily being assessed by us. And that's not our choice necessarily, that is the customer's choice. If they have very extensive applications, then an assessment of that fitness for purpose will also be quite extensive and correspondingly quite expensive. So sometimes they might say, well, 80% of my work is in this area, so I'll focus on that. But it's just worth bearing in mind. So behind the process is the certificate contract. This is an assessment contract which looks at the key aspects that you'd expect. Firstly, the product characteristics. What is claimed for the product? Can we support those claims? Because if we make a statement in the certificate, we are lending our reputation and our badge to that performance claim, so we want to be sure it's correct. We will also audit the factory, which is also important, and we'll monitor factory production control ongoing to say that the product we assessed is still the same product that is being made now, and it will be at least as good as we originally assessed. The design and installation process also needs to be reviewed quite carefully. Sometimes we'll witness installations, particularly for innovative products, because sometimes the installation is a specialist role and you can't just expect anybody to install that system or product. And of course our benchmark is the regulatory guidance, which serves well most of the time, But when you're looking at truly innovative applications or products, we have to try and maintain the standard without having specific guidance in the regulatory guidance. Just a few words about CE marking. It's a sort of product passport. What it means is if you CE mark against the Harmonised product standard, wherever that is done within the EU, it is done to the same test methods, the same level of attestation, and essentially it's a product characterisation process. It doesn't necessarily mean there's independent oversight of all those characteristics. It's just the ones the Commission deems to be critical, like fire, structural safety, etc. So CE marking is totally the responsibility of the person placing the product on the market, and the degree of third-party involvement in initial type testing and factory audit is determined by the European Commission. CE marking is also possible via the voluntary route. This is a process operated by IOTA, the European Organisation for Technical Assessments. These are harmonised specifications, these European assessment documents for assessing largely systems in the past, but anything that's not covered by a harmonised product standard. So that option is available to voluntary CE mark, and it seems quite popular in some countries, Germany, Denmark, etc. produce a lot of ETAs. CE marking process is a very good foundation for agreement certification. It doesn't go the whole way because we do things that CE marking doesn't do, but it's a good start. So the certificate itself will describe the product and the key ancillary items that have to be used with the product or the system. It describes delivering site handling, how it can be handled on site correctly, the overall design approach, the practicability of installation, and then the specific design issues that bite on that particular system or product, like structural adequacy, fire, moisture. You could almost go through Schedule 1 of the building regulations and pick out the ones that apply. And the overall fitness for purpose under Regulation 7, of course, and durability and maintenance. There'll also be a brief summary of the installation process in the certificate, which is not exhaustive, but it captures some key points that a certificate user might want to be aware of. But it's not replacing the manufacturer's detailed guidance. So once issued, the agreement certificate has an indefinite life, but it's subject to factory audits, nearly always twice a year, and every 3 years a technical review. More and more that review is resulting in a reissue of the certificate, just to update things that are slightly out of date. Having said that, we don't want to adjust certificates every time there's a small change. So if there's a certificate on our website, we are happy that the product can be used to do more or less what it says, even if there's the odd standard that's out of date. And I think agreement certification, it offers a level of assurance that you won't get with other schemes. Most particularly, we are doing factory audits, and more recently we've started offering a product excellence package where we do testing of products from the market. So, briefly talking about moisture, context and standards. I'm going to go through some of the key documents which are guiding our thinking in this area. One of the first ones was the Sustainable and Traditional Building Alliance produced this responsible retrofit of traditional buildings, and it has quite a wide impact actually, because a lot of the housing stock is what we call traditional buildings, older buildings. And there's a lot of good detail in there. These are all documents you can download off the website. Then there was the BSI White Paper. This actually led to the current ongoing revision of BS 5250, which is one of our key documents cited in the regulatory guidance for controlling condensation risk. I'll talk about that quite a bit more later. But that built on experiences of energy retrofit issues that arose during schemes like ECO, etc. Then, of course, the Bonfield Review, which is now the Each Home Counts Review. This was issued nearly 2 years ago now, but it's still guiding our thinking on managing moisture risks, skills and training, etc. I should also mention the UK Centre for Moisture in Buildings, which is a relatively new venture, but it's doing some really interesting and positive work on the issue of moisture. We're going to hear from the other speakers today that moisture is associated with a lot of building problems and defects. And we didn't have, until this body was set up, any focal point for those issues. So it's well worth visiting their website and looking at the work they're doing currently, or the work they've just done. It is in a formative process, but it's a very valuable resource, I think. Also, the PAS 2030, the guide for installing energy retrofits, is being revised, quite close to being finished. I think it will probably come out early next year. And a new PAS 2035, which is like an overarching design approach to energy retrofits. That's new, that's coming out. It's going to be written into the next phase of ECO, and it will be available to other schemes, housing associations, anyone who wants to say, I want to aim for this level of design competence, as it were. So the biggest issues that it's trying to tackle is a skills shortage and knowledge shortage. In terms of standards, the standards we're using now, what's happening with them, where are they going? 6946 is the method for combined U-value calculations, which we've all heard of, I'm sure. That changed last year, but not significantly. It was just trying to align itself with the Energy Performance of Buildings directives, but fundamentally the calculation is still the same. These standards I'm talking about are the important ones because they are cited in regulatory guidance. They are what we use for design and ticking off building elements and buildings in this area. BR 443 is the Conventions for U-value calculations. That's a national document. It's also cited, and together with 6946, this is how we do our U-value calcs. It is undergoing a major update. It's not so much changing what's there, it's adding quite a lot to it. That was originally intended to be issued some months ago, but there's some issues on roof lights still to be ironed out. But hopefully early next year we will see that as a new conventions document, and it has new things in it, so it's worth keeping an eye out for that. SAP 2012, that's more or less been concluded. It won't be in effect until Part L is issued and enforced, but they will call up the new SAP. It has some changes in it about heating patterns. Now we assume that weekends are heated in the same way as weekdays, which wasn't the case before. What is significant is that the accredited construction details, the standard junctions, I values and temperature factors, they are going to disappear because they're not complete, and in some cases they're not necessarily very accurate. So they will be replaced by the conservative defaults from SAP 2012, which are roughly twice the Xi value we had before. That's the linear thermal transmittance of the junctions, and it's a bit on overheating risks. BS 5250, again, that is the standard we use for calculating risks of surface and interstitial condensation. That is undergoing a significant update, and again early next year, well maybe April, we might see a draft for public comment. What we're trying to do is maintain the elemental approach to assessing moisture risk, but also looking at those connective issues where you have junctions and you look at the impact of a measure on the rest of the building. Much of it will be familiar, but there will be new things in there as well. It's taking a whole building, holistic approach to managing moisture risk, not just from condensation, but also from rain, to some extent moisture from the ground. Maybe accidental water spillage, but not flooding, because that's covered by another standard. BS 6229, the flat roofs standards, has undergone a major revision. It's not issued yet, but it will be probably before Christmas. It's a much leaner document. The metal roofs part has been moved to another BSI committee, so that's not in there. But you'll find that 6229 is much more up to date now. There's a bit more about green roofs and blue roofs and things like that. BS 9250, that's the code of practice for the airtightness of ceilings in pitched roofs. That is an important one because it's often overlooked. It has some very good guidance on how to seal ceilings to avoid heat loss and, perhaps more importantly, moisture escaping from the living space into a cold roof space and causing problems. 5534, the slating and tiling and for pitched roofs and vertical cladding, that's updated recently. Nice to see they're actually recognising the value of accredited components, and they've actually put that in the standard that designers are advised to consider those components. 13859 is the Harmonised product standard for the underlays. It covers the breathable underlays we use. It's undergoing a 5-year review next year, and there will probably be some changes in that, and Michael knows all about that as he's on that working group. 13984 is the, I suppose we'd say that's the vapor control layers and the air barriers, the non-breathable ones. I'll talk about that more later this morning. 15026, this is the EN method for how to do dynamic modelling of moisture movement through building elements. This is much more extensive than BS 5250, which is a one-dimensional vapor diffusion model only. This covers moisture movement in all its mechanisms, driving rain, temperature changes, etc. It's a bit delayed now. It should be issued hopefully early next year as a draft for comment, and the big changes in that are covering two-dimensional cases now. Previously it's just one-dimensional, so you can do timber joist insulation as a two-dimensional model. And it's also going to recommend a conservative design approach, that when you're modelling, say, external cladding, you introduce 1% of the incident or wind-driven rain falling on that cladding. You say that's going to go behind the cladding by some means or other during the life of the building. It might not sound a lot, but it is quite a lot of moisture, so it's a lot more than you get from condensation. So the purpose of that is to say, is this design robust enough to manage that moisture and dissipate it without damaging the fabric of that element? So that is a calculation, a dynamic modelling calculation. So we should see that early next year. And of course, so 13788, which is really the standard that 5250 refers to do these calculations of interstitial and surface condensation risk. In terms of regulatory guidance, Part L will be updated next year. Whether it will come into effect, then I don't know. Part C moisture was looked at a couple of years ago, but it seems to be on the back burner at the moment. But it's worth keeping an eye on that in case something comes out. You can sign up for alerts on regulatory consultations and BSI standards that are of interest to you. Just sign up on the BSI website. So, on Brexit, what can we say about that? I'm sure we're all suffering from Brexit fatigue, but maybe something will happen in the next few days. When I prepared this presentation, the government had just issued some guidance on what to do in a no-deal Brexit case. If you've seen this, obviously it's going to be chaos, but essentially, in terms of certification bodies and services, it's quite dramatic. We would no longer be there'd be no notified bodies in the UK providing notified body services like for CE marking. There would be no technical assessment bodies doing voluntary CE marking, no tabs in the UK. We would accept CE marked goods and services for an undefined period, obviously to keep that supply chain going, but we don't know how long. There was mention of a UK mark to mirror CE marking, which would eventually replace CE marking. Whether that goes ahead or not, we don't know, but it's quite an undertaking. If we do get a transitional deal, then we carry on more or less as normal until the end of 2020, by which time hopefully things will be ironed out and we'll have more time to prepare for the big changes that are coming. Okay then, thank you very much then.